One man was arrested by the police in a scrum, and somebody who lived in the building next to me passed me footage which showed clearly the police officer walloping him 3 times, in the head, directly above punching. And obviously, the cameras from the grounds, we were blocked from seeing this sight, of course, by the line of the police. So they always go far more heavy-handed when it comes to the right than it comes to the left.
I found it very interesting that they did implement that Section 42 order. They didn't feel the need to do that in 2020 with BLM when they were hitting them over the head with lumps of wood and chasing their officers down the street, or they didn't feel the need to do that for any of the pro-Hamas Palestine protests that have occupied Westminster every weekend and Wednesday for almost a year after October 7th. In fact, they engaged in Islamic apologetics on Twitter when Hizb ut-Tahrir said Muslim armies rise up for jihad, and some Islamic scholar working for the Met Police said, well, jihad has a number of meanings. But when mums form a conga line because they don't want to battery farm foreign rapists at their taxpayers' expense, then they feel the need for the might of the state to crack down on them. So I just find it very curious there, as you said, two-tier policing, the double standard that is implemented for concerned parents versus the state's racial and religious client groups.
If it's once a week, people start looking forward to going to the protest, at 1 o'clock every Saturday. It'll be something that as I said, unites and binds them. And with that community feeling and spirit, if they restrict it to once or twice a week, they will be able to keep this up for quite a long time.
Hello and welcome to Deprogram. It's good to be back. My name is Harrison Pitt. I'm a fellow at the New Culture Forum, and I'm delighted to be joined today, as ever, by Connor Tomlinson, the man behind the Tomlinson Talks YouTube channel, and our special guest this week, Jack Hadfield, who is an independent journalist and reporter who has been on the front line of the recent uprising by the men and women of England against the migrant hotels. And I will begin. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Great pleasure. So I will start with you, given that you have, as I say, been on the front line of all this, and it's sort of 3-part question. Let's just first talk about the dynamics of these protests themselves. What have been some of the notable behavioral patterns among the following 3 relevant groups? The protesters themselves, the counter-protesters, and the police.
Well, I guess let's start with the protesters themselves then. The best way to look at it is to directly compare it with what we saw after Southport last year. I was on the ground there as well, and what we saw there was, fiery, angry, immediate violence after the deaths of 3 young girls that were completely preventable, if we had a better immigration policy. That was anger, that was, attacking police vans, that was throwing bricks at mosques and random corner shops.
You lost a tooth.
I lost a tooth, got glued back on the next day, basically, close enough. And, they were trying to burn down asylum hotels in some areas as well. But that was white hot, and it obviously fizzled out after only approximately 6 days. What we're seeing now in comparison with these protesters, first things first, is a slightly different demographic. It's not exactly the people who turned out to Southport, had some classic sort of, far-right thugs, people just wanting violence for the sake of violence. Whereas here now, it's normal people, it's parents, a lot of children are at the protests, and what I see now is still anger, but a colder anger, something that's bubbling and holding together without fully blowing off the metaphorical pot lid. These people are resolved, and I think because they're so normal people as well, they are, they don't want to throw bricks at the police, for example. They just want to peacefully protest. There might be some harassment and intimidation and shouting at counter-protesters here and there and asylum seekers. But they have a goal in mind, which is shut down these hotels, or in some places their private accommodation. So they are a hell of a lot more controlled, and I think they're aware, obviously, of what happened last summer. In that, I think even if some people wanted to kick off a little bit, they know that the Starmer regime would immediately crack down upon them. So it's both a combination of being a slightly different demographic group to those that came out last year, and obviously now realizing that they have a goal in place. They don't want everybody just to get arrested and locked up immediately. So moving on to the counter-protesters, obviously there's slightly 2 different groups usually. The main one that's being counter-protesting here is, of course, Stand Up to Racism, the sister organisation of Unite Against Fascism, which is all union-linked. So first things first, these people who come up to the counter-protesters, they're not the locals to begin with. The locals are all protesting the asylum hotels. In Epping, for example, you had people with Stand Up to Racism placards all saying, Epping welcomes asylum seekers. You all came on the tube, like me, to Epping from central London. You were bussed in. These people are far more aggressive, certainly with the press and certainly with independent journalists like myself. They don't want to talk to you. They don't want to be on camera. I tried to interview some of them previously, and I had multiple people coming up to the interviewee saying, don't talk to this guy, far-right, racist, fascist, whatever. Which is not the reception I've received on the other side.
So it's worth just mentioning here quickly that this goes to show that a great deal of these so-called counter-protesters often strikes me as very sort of astroturf and manufactured. The fact that, as you were reporting, they tend to bus in, one presumes, from much more affluent areas than the places where these migrants are being put up in hotels and causing all sorts of negative externalities for the local residents there, not least harassing and in some cases raping and molesting young women and indeed children. As we have seen, there have been people who've been charged with such offences and brought before court proceedings for such offences. Like, they are not paying the price for the project that they happily applaud and like seals. And so it goes to show how chronic and toxic luxury and sort of proudly indifferent to people's actual everyday concerns these high-minded ideologues can be.
Yeah, and I have seen the same people at the same protests outside the Britannia Hotel and in Epping. Right, yeah. Some of them are going to be the organisers, but these are some people who turn up because they get the call, turn out, hello, Stand Up for Racism here. We need you to counteract the far right in wherever. Yes. What will be interesting to see, because this Friday, which is August the 8th, there are at least 14 protests outside asylum hotels across the country spread out, and there'll be more on Saturday as well. Now, Stand Up for Racism have organised a counter-protest at each of these locations. I wonder what the crowd level is going to be for these counter-protesters, because obviously at each one, the asylum protesters will be locals. So they don't move, they don't change, they don't go across the country, following them around. Whereas the Stand Up to Racism lot will.
So it's really spread quite thin.
I think they'll be spread very, very thin. And then the behaviour of the police, in terms of the third section to that question, the police have been certainly engaging from my mind in a little bit of two-tier policing. We saw this when I was at the Thistle City Hotel in the Barbican in Islington last Saturday, where there was a bigger counter-protest included Antifa. Now, the police that went to, jostled and tried to arrest Antifa, someone going into the crowd there, they weren't in full riot gear. They didn't have batons. It was more of a scuffle than rather a complete assault, which, I managed to get footage from just the day after outside the Britannia Hotel, where one man was arrested by the police in a scrum, and somebody who lived in the building next to me passed me footage which showed clearly the police officer walloping him 3 times, in the head, directly above punching. And obviously the cameras from the ground, we were blocked from seeing this sight, of course, by the line of the police. So they always go far more heavy-handed when it comes to the right than it comes to the left. They haven't been too bad overall, but still, there is still a level of two-tier policing that we're seeing on the ground now.
Yeah, I thought it was very notable that the police felt the need outside the Britannia Hotel in Canary Wharf to put forward a public space disposal order, Section 42A?
Yes, it was Section 42A under, I believe, the Crime and Policing Act 2001. So what happened with this order, which was issued at 5:30 p.m. on Sunday night, it applied to everybody who was part of the protest at that specific time. Everybody who is still there at 5:30, they are not permitted to come back to the Britannia Hotel for 28 days. However, it does not apply to anyone who wasn't there. So anybody who was in the protest in the Women and Children's March, which started at 12, let's say if they left at 3 or 4, they could come back and protest and continue to do so the next day. But there was a significant chunk of people still there at the time, probably around 100. And now, obviously, the police, they bring out these massive 4K cameras that are constantly scanning the crowd, clearly getting people's faces. So I do think if anyone who was there, who had the Section 42A order applied to them, I think if they do come back, they are definitely at risk of arrest.
So obviously they are capable of identifying some faces, but the fact that they're implementing this anyway means they're going to err on the side of caution of shutting down lawful protest with the guise of preventing public disorder, despite police in Epping busing, or at least escorting, stand up to racism counter-demonstrators to the front lines where the parents are peacefully protesting, and then, for all intents and purposes, inciting and provoking violence, and then bussing them out and driving into a bloke with a van when things get a bit hot and hairy. I found it very interesting that they did implement that Section 42 order. They didn't feel the need to do that in 2020 with BLM when they were hitting them over the head with lumps of wood and chasing their officers down the street. Or they didn't feel the need to do that for any of the pro-Hamas Palestine protests that have occupied Westminster every weekend and Wednesday for almost a year after October 7th. In fact, they engaged in Islamic apologetics on Twitter when Hizb ut-Tahrir said Muslim armies rise up for jihad, and some Islamic scholar working for the Met Police said, well, jihad has a number of meanings. But when mums form a conga line because they don't want to battery farm foreign rapists at their taxpayers' expense, then they feel the need for the might of the state to crack down on them. So I just find it very curious there, as you said, two-tier policing, the double standard that is implemented for concerned parents versus the state's racial and religious client groups.
Well, I think the Section 42A order has to specifically apply to causing harassment, alarm, and distress to somebody in their permanent residence. So this legally, I believe, applies to the asylum seekers. Now, obviously, the hotel is a hotel, but for the purposes of this, it is their permanent residence while doing so. So I guess, you couldn't necessarily apply that to ones at Westminster, but there are other things that they could do. You could have a full protest exclusion zone under different pieces of legislation.
In 2020,
still won't do it.
In 2013, they banned the EDL for that exact reason. They were going to do a protest march through London. But also, it's very telling that they specifically saying the asylum seekers themselves, it wasn't the staff, presumably, the asylum seekers themselves, the illegal migrants themselves, are now a protected class, that the police are basically acting as a private security force for them. The best emblem of this was, of course, the footage of them escorting an Uber Eats delivery cyclist through the crowd.
Yeah.
And we can't say for this particular individual, but we do know for a fact that lots of Deliveroo, Just Eat and Uber Eats cyclists are illegal migrants themselves, working without their papers, just pocketing money from the gig economy. And they were delivering food straight to the asylum hotel. And then in the photos from the Barbican protest that you were at, it was printed in the Daily Mail, these men didn't look exactly alarmed and distressed. Instead, they were whooping, cheering, jeering, spitting, throwing things out the window with their brand new iPhones.
Filming.
Which presumably we've paid for because they came from a war zone and they are the tired and huddled masses we have to take care of, right?
Filming our righteous indignation with smartphones that we've paid for.
Yeah, they were laughing at us. They are the state is ultimately the arbiter and the accomplice of our demographic displacement and cultural erasure. But these people are jubilant about their role to play in it. Yes. So they are just as guilty as the police and state are themselves.
Hello, please excuse this brief interruption, but I'd be really grateful if you could please hit the subscribe button and subscribe to our channel. Our mission is vitally important, and we must grow this channel to ensure that our content reaches the biggest possible audience. The best way to do this is for you to subscribe. It's totally free. And in addition to subscribing, if you're able to donate or join our membership scheme, please click on the link in the description or visit our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. We've got great plans ahead, but we can't do it without your support. From only £4 per month, you'll receive a range of perks and benefits, including exclusive content. Thank you.
Yeah, and of course, with that Uber Eats driver, as you mentioned, I think everybody who was there did realise he wasn't, an asylum seeker at that specific hotel. But they're all saying things to him like, non-supporter, etc., shouting these things at him, and also asking the police, like, well, why aren't you checking this guy's papers? Because he very much well could be an illegal immigrant
from a hotel down the road.
Yeah, but even if he's here legally, he's still supporting, the asylum seekers in the hotel by delivering the food to them.
Who we were told weren't going to be there, by the way. I do want to put a pin in this, because as soon as the Epping Council, despite one Conservative councillor there calling them all Nazis for doing this, when Epping Council voted to close the hotel, we were told, well, they're not going to the Britannia in Canary Wharf. It's just far-right misinformation that you've gathered outside of it. And then some cunning independent journalists, much like yourself, went down and at the gates that they'd put up, these big barricades after they'd been putting mattresses and toothbrushes in, caught them busing all the men in grey tracksuits, almost like a uniform, like it's a military training camp, in the dead of night, like 4 a.m, straight into that hotel. So we're just being repeatedly lied to in order to discourage our outrage so that this can continue without any opposition.
And it didn't strike me as a particularly elite stream of human capital either. Trickling out of
doctors, lawyers, engineers,
trickling out of this bus, and I think
atomic rocket fuel.
You're quite right. Yeah. Well, and frankly, I think Rupert Lowe has been has shown great courage on this question by touching what has been a third rail in much of our politics over the last 40 to 50 years, and talking about where are these people coming from, and what are the average IQ rates in these countries. I mean, Rupert Lowe has been explicit about that, and the three most prominent countries from which these asylum seekers hail are Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Iran. Pakistan with an average IQ of 80, Afghanistan with an average IQ of 82, and Iran with an average IQ of 80 as well.
Eritrea a lot from the early parts of this year as well.
68.
I like how you knew that off the top of your head.
Yes, I do. For people who are unaware of what these numerical values mean, the European average is about 100, and North European average about 105. So and that tends to go hand in hand with a great amount with very low impulse control, and it's certainly not a sign. So in other words, at best, it's a sign that you're not going to make much in the way of an economic contribution, which is why I make that remark about a very sarcastic remark about the low human capital of the people who were coming off that bus at that hotel. And second, low impulse control, exactly the sort of thing that goes hand in hand with wanting to rape 12-year-old girls, wanting to try and kiss a 14-year-old girl, trying their luck. Bear in mind that many of these men do not have access to white women who in their cultures are very much romanticized as enviable booty. And in this case, I think they view it as, in some sense, being the sort of the booty of conquest. And so it is simply not sustainable in the long run to subsidize these people's livelihoods while letting them roam freely in the community, such that they can engage in these sorts of actions. They should be detained upon arrival and swiftly deported. And there should be a credible deterrent preventing them from coming from France. With this, the government, at every step of the way, the British state, it never wants to address the problem at source. It always wants to address it 2 or 3 or 4 steps removed. And if you do that, it's not good enough. So doing a deal with France, Macron actually made a good point. It has to be said. I wish the French were doing more, but I do think it's a rather convenient get-out for our political class to blame the French the whole time. The simple fact is that if we made Britain less attractive and less congenial to these people, they wouldn't be here. And similarly, you can cite all of these sort of 2001, Crime and Policing Act orders and say, well, technically this hotel counts as the permanent residency for these people, and therefore it does constitute a form of harassment to be outside there. But the only reason why it constitutes their permanent residency is because we're being replaced and we're being forced at gunpoint to subsidize our replacements as well. And so really, I do think that so much of Britain's existing legislative architecture is just not well suited to contend with this new situation. So that this really does need to be addressed fundamentally and at source. And we are run by midwits who are so attached to that system, people like Starmer, who are such creatures of process and view the very idea of stepping outside of that Blairite legal system as just unthinkable, the equivalent of expecting a Catholic to renounce the doctrine of transubstantiation in the 16th century or today, if they take their Catholicism seriously. That we really are in a situation where we are moving so closer to forms of civil conflict, and our political class is incapable of finding an off-ramp, even though there's one readily available if they were willing to pursue it, but they just aren't. Do you think that we're going to see more of this civil conflict over the course of the summer? It's only early August, of course.
Well, yes, exactly. I do think that this will continue for the foreseeable future. Again, looking at Southport, anger burns white hot, but the fuel runs out very, very quickly. These people are determined. We're already about 3 weeks in since the first protest started in Epping on the Thursday, and more protests are continuing. They're gathering. I went to a new one just in Stanwell, near Heathrow, just last Thursday. And these people are going to keep going there on a regular basis. As I said, 14 protests on Friday, August the 8th. And some of those, there haven't been any yet. It's just going to continue. People are going to see... Well, that's the thing. Starmer certainly is stuck between a rock and a hard place, because if he doesn't shut down the asylum hotels, then people... communities are already protesting it, will keep protesting it because they want it gone, and they feel extremely determined to get rid of them from the community. But then say Starmer, let's say he then does order to shut down the Bell Hotel in Epping, well then everybody knows, well then it works and you can win, and then even more communities are going to start popping up and protesting. And even if one community tires of doing so, it's going to be really like a protest hydra. 2 more will pop up to take their place.
And you just need to wait until the next incident in that community, and maybe enthusiasm to the determination will dampen for a bit. But one groping incident, and all of a sudden the community is up in arms again.
Well,
exactly.
But there's 2 reasons why they're going to be all across the country. Number one, because every single day we get a brand new story of some foreign sex criminal assaulting a child. Like it was a Pakistani man
Yesterday,
raping a girl
wasn't it?
twice, or it was 2 days ago, I think.
8-year-old?
Yeah, something like that one. That
There's a 10-year-old kidnapped incident in Wilmslow, and a 12-year-old raped allegedly by two Afghan asylum seekers in Nuneaton.
There was the Iranian who's now only got 7 years. There was the Eritrean who only got a 14-month sentence, but because he was held on remand for so long, he's not going to get any more prison time for sexually assaulting a 19-year-old. That's 20 months less, by the way, than both Lucy Connolly and the late Peter Lynch. So Hurty words tweet about the asylum hotel, 34 months. Actually attack a 19-year-old woman with special needs, no prison time. Brilliant. And also because, okay, let's say they shut down the asylum hotels. You've got Operation Scatter. So they're now in dispersed accommodation across neighbourhoods, so that, according to Angela Rayner and her demented, hideous communist beliefs, everyone gets their equitable fair share of GDP contributors. And so they're going to be in houses of multiple occupancy, nestled near schools and neighbourhoods. And so that means that pretty much every town and city in this country has a reason to go out and demonstrate until these people are just removed. And we are under no impression these people are good people either. I just want to keep hammering that home. But the amount of videos of them slitting their throats at people filming them, or saying we're here to take over, or the fact that ahead of time they advertise, as I helped GB Newsbreak a couple of years ago, white English women on nights out, dressed immodestly by their standards, as in the traditional Islamic view, the spoils of war, of booty. And that is intercut with images of burning churches, them boarding boats or breaking under borders, and even ISIS fighter footage. Like, we know why they're here. It's for violence and conquest. None of them are good people. They all need to go home.
That's absolutely right. And it's also worth mentioning as well, that I would imagine, please tell me if you disagree, both of you actually, once Operation Scatter hits full steam and these people find themselves less in hotels, which, let's be honest, do operate as quite good gathering points for these sorts of protests, because it's one place, there's a great big name on the front of it, and it's a matter of public record that they're being housed there, because it sort of has to be. Great, we've got our protest underway. With HMOs, they are more scattered across communities. It might be harder to do, to engage in these sorts of mass acts of protest when it comes to HMOs, just because they are more dispersed throughout a given neighbourhood. Do you think that then, whatever criticisms we might have of reform of late, that reform's victory in the May Council elections will become do you think that basically sort of political manoeuvring on councils will come more into effect once Operation Scatter is underway, because it's only because councils have access to the HMO data and all the rest of it? Or do you think there will still be a role for protest when that's dispersed?
Well, there definitely still will be, and I can say that for a fact, because the Nuneaton incident with the 12-year-old girl and the 2 Afghan asylum seekers, they were, they were housed at an HMO, and the protest this Saturday is taking place outside the town council. So there still will be, locations, and of course, other people have been, suggesting, like in my replies on X, saying like, well, why don't people start protesting outside the Home Office? for example, in the middle of London, doing a big national one concentrated there in terms of, as in, these people are the fault of why the asylum seekers are raping and sexually assaulting my kids. So it's obviously is harder. And then, of course, as well, as we saw in Ballymena in Northern Ireland, well, what did they do? They found the houses and they started burning them down.
Yes.
It's not like there still can't be protest or targeted locations as well. But I do think as well, you're right. There might be some political manoeuvring with reform councils in order to find out where these people are as well. Of course,
I think Conservative MPs as well. So Rupert has obviously written to the Home Office time and time again, never gotten a response. But he, alongside all the great Yarmouth councillors, no matter what party stripe they are, have said, Great Yarmouth is inhospitable for illegal migrants, and we are not housing them here. They will go elsewhere. And so if you have a preference cascade in that direction, especially considering the Conservatives are in the political doldrums right now, they are seen as the not just accomplices, but stewards of this problem, being just as unwilling as the current Labour government to repeal the laws necessary to get these men out of here. If you see MPs go, well, I want a break from the last 14 years. I need to make a very public statement, write it out, say I need to do all the measures necessary to corral these men and get them out of my constituency. Then you have a volume both within Parliament and on the ground that builds momentum and builds pressure on the government. The only thing we will get, though, without some American State Department assistants stepping in and stopping it, is instead the government's reaction will be to crack down on the native British host majority who are complaining about the sex offenders in their local area. We've already had a new Home Office police unit dedicated to monitoring anti-migrant sentiment. We've got terror powers that were commissioned in 2017 to target ISIS propaganda videos now being turned on tweets and groups that are trying to organise these protests. We are being treated, and I say we collectively here because I support the protesters, obviously can't support violence legally. Don't give the state an excuse to lock you up, guys, that's all. But we are being targeted as the provocateurs when it is the state and their foot soldiers, these men from these violent nations who see us as deserving of conquest, who have done this to us. We're not the villains here.
That's absolutely correct. So before we move on to consider the ramifications of the Online Safety Act, which I think is interesting because this came into effect last month, or yes, in the middle of last month or late last month, I forget when exactly. I want to ask you, Jack, just give us a rough thumbnail sketch of where we are at the moment with these protests. Like, what are the main sort of hotspots on the map? And in what sense have they been successful? I mean, have hotels been shut down? Has this public pressure campaign worked? How do you rate the success of this uprising, if you want to call it that?
It's still probably too early to give a full outlook on that, but the first success that they had was obviously the Epping Council voting to support the closure of the Bell Hotel. Now, of course, they couldn't do it themselves because it was a Home Office decision, but, you still have the political pressure backing that. And I think, if you have, for example, reform-backed councils or even any councils across the country voting, we don't want these people here, we don't want them in our community says no, you have all of the local authorities, rebelling against the, central government authority, then that would be a massive political success for them and be a real headache for the Starmer regime. I will say, so in terms of the hotspots, I will say Epping will probably continue to be one of the centre points here. Obviously, the community is very, on board and backing that. I think we could continue to see London, the Britannia Hotel specifically, perhaps Thistle City, Manchester, areas around there, because I believe there was a big protest. I think that Britain First organised just over the weekend as well. In
Manchester. Was that remigration rally that
Mm.
the Times were using for their articles that showed the new YouGov polling that 45% of the country want mass deportations.
Yes, exactly. So Manchester probably will be, as again, obviously there are multiple instances. One is obviously in Wilmslow with that attempted kidnapping of a 10-year-old. But the thing is, I guess it's going to be harder to track more with the protest locations that the hotspots are going to be, because they are so based on the crimes that have occurring. I'll be in Nuneaton on Saturday. I think that could get quite hot and heavy, maybe, because obviously it was an actual two guy alleged rape of a 12-year-old,
covered up by the police as well.
Covered up by the police, full grooming gangs ish.
They themselves say we don't want to
tensions.
Exactly.
And obviously that only just came out a few days ago. So really, we're going to see, I think, probably where the worst crimes have occurred, you're probably going to get more of that being a hotspot location for protests as they continue throughout the rest of the summer and, you know, maybe even the autumn and the winter.
And even if Labour don't have to play political whack-a-mole with each of these local authorities and local protests, what it does build is just the increasing and valid perception that the British state, the justice system, who said that Iranian man wasn't a dangerous individual despite him raping a child, the police, who are practicing two-tier policing and cracking down more on mothers than they are on race communists or things like Notting Hill Carnival, and Starmer himself, they're just all illegitimate. They're they've taken the side of foreign criminals against us. They do not speak for us, and you can't have a political order founded on that illegitimacy.
The language they use as well goes to show how chronically schizophrenic they are on these questions. You can't on the one hand claim that diversity is a strength and then say, and being transparent with the public and enforcing the law without fear or favour under conditions of diversity are liable to inflame community tensions. Which is it? They can't both be true. Not content to continue this illegitimate project, and I would even argue sort of ethnocidal project of replacement migration, our political establishment also seems very eager, as Connor has already hinted at, to censor, silence, and indeed persecute us for complaining about some of the more gruesome consequences. We've already seen the very pernicious Online Safety Act go into force, I think, last month. How has this affected your reporting and indeed wider coverage of this very important event in our national life?
Well, as far as I know, the only specific ones that I've seen have been taken down on X, for example, restricted, were some violence that happened in Leeds, which I believe was last week. And it is quite funny where Brits basically have to ask their American friends what's going on in my own country because, you know, the Online Safety Act won't let me see it. It does seem, you know, some sites obviously are applying it in different ways. X right now seems to be going a little bit heavy-handed. You know, they don't have any specific age verification to get around these things, like ID or, you know, face verification stuff. I haven't seen any of my specific posts be restricted, but I imagine, you know, if it does start to get hotter, if there's more incidents of violence, you know, clashes between there, I imagine that'll be the stuff that starts to get restricted. People won't be able to see this straight away. I will say the only silver lining of the Online Safety Act is what was taken out of it just before, you know, by the Sunak administration, which was the misinformation and disinformation clause. That was put in at the start back in 2020 when they first had it under the Online Harms Bill. I really, if they had misinformation and disinformation now legally, you know, the social media sites have to get rid of them. I couldn't imagine what the state would of other social media sites look like right now. It would be 10 times worse than what we already have implicated. So we seem to have, you know, dodged a bullet, and now, you know, instead of going straight for the heart, it's grazed us in the shoulder.
That being said, they have created under Section 179 a brand new offence, which, and I will try and paraphrase the wording to the best of my ability. It is that if you have sent a message or made a post that a judge decrees you had no legitimate reason to send, and that it caused non-trivial psychological or physical harm, then you can be given a prison sentence for it. This is just another means of criminalising online speech. So it's just stacking more offences atop the existing legislation, like the Malicious Communications Act, Public Order Acts and Communications Act, that leads to 12,000 people a year to be in prison. So I think we're going to see a lot more prosecutions, or at least charges, citing that specific statute.
You mentioned this at the beginning, Jack, the involvement of more and more women in these protests is, I think, a very relevant detail. And it's not only encouraging, in my view, because it makes it much harder for the state to engage in management perception. As Connor joked earlier, a bunch of innocuous-looking patriotic English ladies doing the conga is much harder to demonise and stigmatise than
a few football lads getting rowdy and throwing their beer bottles.
Indeed.
Yeah, well, fact check on that. They also did the hokey cokey.
Crucial.
Basically goose-stepping.
The eagle-eyed Jack Hadfield noticing every detail that's relevant. Thank you for bringing that to proceedings. But I think it's also encouraging because women, and I'm sure you'd agree, Connor, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this, they're usually, whenever they're involved in movements, they're usually indicative of a preference cascade underway.
Yeah, so young women, as we've seen with the sort of bifurcation between our generation, young men are trending more right-wing, young women are trending more left-wing. But when it's specifically mothers and grandmothers turning out with their children, it shows that, one, yes, a preference cascade is in the direction of this being popular and a safe opinion to hold, or at least it is safer than the alternative of allowing foreign sex criminals to run rampant and inflict damage on your children. And two, this is such a deeply held conviction that mothers who would otherwise be preoccupied with the school run or managing their own household or even their own jobs need to turn out en masse and disrupt their own schedules because they feel sincerely about this. It's not like they've got they've gone through the trouble of making their own placards, of trying to articulate their fears when they're not professional public speakers, as opposed to the likely agent provocateurs and paid agitators of Stand Up to Racism who are backed by the National Education Union and ASLEF, who are escorted around by the police and given special protections at every possible time. They even have their own private security that deter people like yourself or Ben Leo from trying to talk to them and film them. So it shows this all sort of organic groundswell. It shows that there is a fever pitch that is being reached that the state itself cannot ignore. Otherwise, it cements its own irrelevancy and illegitimacy.
So you agree, cause for hope, and how can we prevent this from being just another summer flash in the pan? How can we keep the how do we keep the momentum going?
So, yeah, in terms of the women and children, certainly, I like that is going to be, that already was there a little bit at the first protest I went to in Epping on the Sunday a few weeks ago, which was a few days after it first started there. There were already women and children saying, we're not far right, we're just local, or another one was, not far right, but not far wrong. But now specifically with the Britannia Hotel protest where they all turned up in pink, and it was a very specific women and children's only march. Theirs started at 12 noon just outside the Jubilee station in Canary Wharf, marched down, and then the main protest started at 3. So the community gave the mothers, the grandmothers, the kids their own space first before everybody else joined in to support them afterwards. And I know this certainly the wearing pink is going to continue. They'll be doing that in Epping on Friday. I definitely have confirmed that. I'm sure more locations will continue, and just having the optics of women and mothers, grandmothers, and kids ranging from little babies to octogenarians, all dressed up in pink, standing against the state, saying, "Look, we just don't want men who are 22 times more likely to be convicted for sexual assault." That's Afghan nationals compared to British nationals. That's specific stats. In our community. In terms of how this continues, the main thing, and I was talking to a number of people about this. In order to keep up momentum, you don't want to be protesting every day because people will get tired. You can't do it at 6 o'clock after work, every weekday, then the weekends. It's just not going to function. So the communities, and this, it seems that they've started to do this now, basically pick either 1 or 2 days a week max. Either a day, a weekday, either Thursday, Friday, 6 p.m. or in the early afternoon on a Saturday or Sunday. If they stick to once or twice a week, not only can they keep the energy going, but then, as I said in my critic article about this, that it actually becomes like a community rallying point as well. Like how many of these people who lived right next to each other, and again, all of these locals are genuine locals, even the people in Canary Wharf, they are all from the Isle of Dogs or just around there, some of the remnants of the last East End Cockneys. How many of these people knew their neighbours beforehand? And now, they have a community goal, a force together, and it will become something that unites and bonds them together. If it's once a week, people start looking forward to going to the protest, at 1 o'clock every Saturday. It'll be something that as I said, unites and binds them. And with that community feeling and spirit, if they restrict it to once or twice a week, they will be able to keep this up for quite a long time. Very well put. Well, thank you very much for coming on, Jack. No doubt our viewers are very familiar with your work because they've sent in tons of questions directed at you. But keen to know more about what's going on. You've been been a very dutiful servant of the public interest over the last 2 weeks. And thank you for joining us here. And we'll ask you those questions on our extra members section. Connor, thank you very much for joining me as ever. And thank you very much for watching. If you want to catch your own questions or other people's questions, and indeed
Jack's answers to those questions, be sure to consider signing up as an NCF member, which you can do on our website. But in the meantime, thank you very much for watching, and we shall see you on the next.
Our mission at the New Culture Forum is and always has been to defend and celebrate Britain's history, culture, and its people, and indeed Western civilization, at a time when both are under sustained attack. We have grown from small beginnings to become the country's most influential right-leaning cultural think tank. Our content is watched and read by some of Britain's most influential political figures. But now, we need your help. If you believe in what we do, then please do become a member. For as little as £4 a month, you can make a vital contribution to what we do. As a member of the NCF family, you will help ensure that we can continue to produce quality content online, such as our 3 weekly programs, Whittle, which is our flagship interview show, Newspeak, our panel discussion show, and Deprogrammed, which is targeted at Britain's youth. As you probably know, in addition, we produce important documentaries, such as our critically acclaimed 6-part series, The West, a stunning celebration of the history and genius of Western civilization, and our ongoing documentary series, Heresies, with hard-hitting episodes tackling subjects such as immigration, gender ideology, and BBC bias. But the New Culture Forum is much more than a YouTube channel. We don't just complain about Britain as it is, we provide real solutions and clear policies on how we can push back against the madness and restore sanity to this nation. Our presenters are now highly sought after and have become familiar faces across the media. Our prestigious annual Smith Lecture and our regional and indeed national conferences have attracted world-class speakers. Perhaps most importantly, we are the only organisation on the right of politics that has launched a national movement without actually being a political party. And uniquely, through our NCF Locals programme, we've established some 30 active branches in towns and cities right across the nation, from Edinburgh to Exeter, and with many more on the way. We're very proud of what we've achieved, and our members have made it possible. In return, our members receive access to exclusive content, invitations to private events, free or discounted tickets to our conferences and lectures, free copies of our books, and much more. I very much hope that you'll join us too by clicking the link in the description or going to our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Now is the time that we need your help. Thank you.